מרקוס מורס הוא היסטוריון מוזיאון ולסבורג. מוזיאון זה מתייחד בתערוכת הקבע שלו על תולדות האס-אס. אני מתכבדת להזמין את מורס להרצאתו אידיאולוגיה וטרור של האס-אס, מוזיאון לזכר הקורבנות, באתר הסמלי של המקרבנים. בבקשה.
Thank you. I sincerely thank the Mשואה Institute and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for the invitation, and especially Mali for the organization. In contrast to the colleagues who spoke before, I cannot presume that many of you know much about Wewelsburg and what Wewelsburg should become for the SS. So if you allow, a bigger part of my lecture will be a more historical one. And maybe some of you will ask yourself what this has to do with the general theme of the conference today, but this is of course something we can talk and discuss afterwards. Okay. Between 1933 and 1945, the castle and the village of Wewelsburg was a particular part of what can be called the soldierly body-shaping program of the SS. A program intended to harden the members of the National Socialist Schutzstaffel in every conceivable direction, physically, ideologically, mentally, and environmentally, against any trace of humanity for those who were defined by the SS itself as its enemies. In the aftermath of the Nazi regime, many misunderstanding and misleading affirmative theories and sayings were told and believed about what Wewelsburg was. Since the early 1980s, the District Museum of Wewelsburg works on a responsible research and presentation of this part of German contemporary history. Since the early days of 1933, the SS searched for a castle-like building in Westphalia-Lippe, a Western German region that was considered by right-wing activists as the nucleus of Old Germanic Saxony. At that time, the search was motivated by the will to establish an own ideological school for SS officers, apart from the National Leaders School of the SA in Munich. In November 3rd, 1933, the Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler visited the triangular Wewelsburg Castle for the very first time. He immediately decided to choose the castle and to take it over from its owner, the then district of Büren. That happened in summer 1934 by a 100 years hire contract. After the SS was separated from the SA in summer 1934, after the SS took over the responsibility for the concentration camp system, after the next steps to a further militarization of the SS, and especially after Himmler was appointed as chief of the whole German police, in June 1936, the Schutzstaffel and its Reichsführer became part of the real center of Nazi power. Henceforward, at the latest, in Himmler's mind, Wewelsburg Castle should be used primarily for other purposes, and the title school became a pure camouflage. Actually, Himmler was very keen on keeping Wewelsburg hidden from public eyes all the time and by all means. The most concrete indications of Himmler's aims in Wewelsburg stem from some of his speeches and talks between 1936 till 1939. Summarized, one can say that Wewelsburg Castle should become a discreet, luxury kind of of officers' mess for his higher generals of the SS, the Gruppenführer and Obergruppenführer. An exclusive place for general assemblies of the whole SS Generals Corps or for informal meetings on a lower scale, as well as a facility to rest and create. Of course, all this should happen in an ideologically pimped furniture and environment that on the long run should help to generate and strengthen a special traditional self-concept of the highest SS ranks. Himmler wanted to give the SS the appearance of an elitist, military and racial knights order of National Socialism in an imagined succession of the medieval German knights order that had conquered parts of Middle East Europe. Already within the years until the beginning of World War II, the architectural plans of the SS grew beyond the castle's walls. In 1936-37, a guardhouse was built at the forecourt, and for that the first houses of Wewelsburg inhabitants were destroyed. Afterwards, Himmler's chosen architect Hermann Bartels began to draft a coherent ensemble of buildings to lock up the castle from the rest of the Wewelsburg village. With a pinch of salt, one can say, in the historical review, the increasing empowerment, or at least the increasing self-confidence of Himmler's SS, or in other words, the growing opportunities of the SS to grasp the German society by its violent and terrorist means, are mirrored en miniature by the expansion of the architectural plans for Wewelsburg. The village itself became a site of its terror already in May 1939, when the first concentration camp prisoners arrived from main camp Sachsenhausen to do the further construction work. This is the first preliminary campsite. A purely terrorist forced labor system of the SS replaced the already paramilitary organized public labor service who worked in Wewelsburg until 1938. The war that Germany started with a raid on Poland on September the 1st, 1939, widened the range of opportunities for the SS to exert violence extremely. And almost simultaneously with the beginning of the war, Himmler and Bartels enlarged the architectural design for the SS castle in Wewelsburg enormously. Not only the closer district around the old triangle building should belong to the SS, but the whole village was scheduled to be converted into a giant castle. On August the 5th, 1940, a few weeks after the German conquering of France and the Benelux, and a few days after Himmler got the permission by Hitler to go on with the construction work during the war times, the leader of the SS approved this plan of Bartels. It's the basic form for all the following plans Bartels drew until 1945. The ancient triangle is surrounded by a new castle wall with a radius of more than 300 meters. Outside these walls, Bartels sketched barracks for SS troops, colonies for higher SS leaders, and for lower ranks. And he planned a new Wewelsburg village for those inhabitants who would not agree to the SS's proposal to leave their homes for greater houses and farms in the east. In later plans, Bartels diminished the extent of that village. There are no certain contemporary sources telling us what the new parts of the compound within the walls should be used for. It's rather likely that even Bartels and Himmler didn't pay much attention to this. You can see not so much on the plan, I guess. The North Tower at the pinnacle of the triangle should become the center point of the whole site. The concentration camp prisoners had to tear down the walls above the ground floor. Then, from 1941 till 1943, the two still existing rooms were built in the basement and on the ground floor of the North Tower. Bartels wanted to crown the tower with a room on the first floor, designed as a great dome. But that was prevented by the stop of all construction works in Wewelsburg in spring 1943, after the German defeat in Stalingrad. Even the two rooms remained weren't finished at all. And about their intended use, we also know just little. In fact, it's only the titles that Bartels gave the three North Tower floors from which we can derive our assumptions. The room in the basement, designed like an ancient Greek tholus grave, was called the crypt, or in one document, a room for obsequies. The room on the ground floor with the 12 medieval-like pillars in circle was named Obergruppenführersaal, hall for the supreme generals of the SS. And the planned dome-like hall in an elite classical Roman style on the top got the label Gruppenführersaal, hall for the lieutenant generals of the SS. How can we interpret these architecture, and what does it say about Himmler and the SS? At the latest, since the early 1930s, already before 1933, Himmler regarded the SS as the racial, and what is more important, as the socially elite of the National Socialist movement. From its very beginnings, the quintessence function of the SS was to exert violence. The whole socially uniformed and formatted National Socialism, based on the will to describe certain people as enemies, one has to fight against, and in final consequence, one has to kill. Everything the Nazis did aimed at the preparation and the execution of finally deadly violence. Then Himmler and other SS insiders declared that the SS should be the socially elite and the raiding patrol of National Socialism. That meant that they saw the SS as the true embodiment of that movement. By all means, and of course, first of all, by learning how to prosecute, how to torture, and how to kill, Himmler wanted to transform his SS men contemporarily and in the generations to come into existentialist soldiers who are in every second of their life alert to see enemies they had to fight against and they have to kill. From the exercise of this innermost fundamental function, Himmler derived the claim of power for his SS, which he saw as the new aristocracy of a future great Germanic empire. In that particular moment, when the war started that should produce this gigantic borderless empire, in Himmler's mind, the whole village Wewelsburg turned into a fortified hideaway castle for the generals of the SS. With the denomination of the upper center point North Tower rooms, Himmler placed the Obergruppenführer und Gruppenführer symbolically in the very center of the powerful self-image of the SS, regardless to the practical function of these rooms. And as it was the sine qua non of the existence of the SS to be ready to bring death to enemies and to be ready to die for the patriarchal Nazi idea of unlimited power, the basis of the central self-imaging tower was drafted as a room for the celebration of death. In Wewelsburg itself, the SS killed 1,285 men between 1939 and 1943. 1,229 of them were prisoners of the concentration camp there. Between May 1939 and August 1941, it was an outpost of Sachsenhausen. The men who were brought from there to Wewelsburg during this first year were categorized by the SS as professional criminals. Few of them attempted to escape and were killed outside the preliminary campsite. To prevent further sensation within the people around Wewelsburg, this relatively defiant group of prisoners was exchanged with Jehovah's Witnesses, mainly from Buchenwald since February 1940. These new inmates had to build the permanent camp 400 meters away from the castle on the outskirts of Wewelsburg in the sub-district Niederhagen. On September the 1st, 1941, this camp was elevated to be the main concentration camp Niederhagen, then administratively on the same level as the great camps like Buchenwald or Sachsenhausen. The prisoners had to do forced labor at the castle in a number of quarries where they had to break the building stones. They had to build a villa for the architect Hermann Bartels and a house for its construction staff. Always threatened by the SS guards of the camp, who killed many of them directly or tortured them to death. Others died because of the inhuman conditions of underfeeding and lacking health care. 57% of all the dead were people from the Soviet Union, 27 were Germans, 27% of course, and 9.5% were Poles. In and around Camp Niederhagen, 20 Jews from different countries were killed. One of them was the 15-year-old boy Günther Ranzenberg, who was the first non-prisoner to be hanged on the campgrounds because of a death sentence by SS courts. His crime was throwing snowballs on a girl who turned out to be a daughter of an SS officer. Günther Ranzenberg is the boy in the center. These snowballs were claimed as racial defilement. 56 persons altogether were brought to Niederhagen to be executed there. All in all, 3,900 men were imprisoned in Wewelsburg-Niederhagen from 1939 until 1945. In April 1943, main camp Niederhagen was dissolved. The prisoners were distributed to other camps to work and die there for the German war economy. Just 42 prisoners were left in Wewelsburg to do some maintenance work. Almost all were Jehovah's Witnesses. Who also remained in Wewelsburg was Hermann Bartels and his staff. He worked on his plans until the very last day of the war to be ready if a more successful course of war would allow to bring new and even more prisoners to Wewelsburg to construct a possibly even larger SS castle. On March the 30th, 1945, Himmler gave the order to blast the castle. One day later, a SS command arrived, but the dynamite they had was just enough to let the castle's walls burn out. On April the 2nd, American troops freed the last prisoners of Camp Niederhagen. In a way, one must say that Himmler was rather successful to keep up his planned general casino as a mystery. After the war, many legends and rumors arose what Wewelsburg Castle was and what happened there before 1945. Even the historian Professor Karl Hüser, who prepared the first documentation about Wewelsburg that was opened in 1982, believed that Himmler was about to establish a site of a pseudo-religious cult. Today, many TV teams come to Wewelsburg to make some shots of the North Tower, hoping to see a place that tells something about the so-called occult roots of National Socialism. Not earlier than since the 1990s, the ornament on the floor of the Obergruppenführersaal makes its special career. Since it appeared then in an extreme right-wing novel as the so-called Black Sun, it is used by neo-Nazis all over the world as a distinctive mark. Neo-Nazis, Satanists, and right-wing mystics consider the crypt and the Obergruppenführersaal as places of a pure Germanic aura. It took more than 30 years after the end of World War II until a roundly recognized memorial for the victims of concentration camp Niederhagen was constituted in the shape of the documentation Wewelsburg 1933-1945, Cult and Terror of the SS. It found its place in the former guardhouse of the SS. This was an exhibition mainly based on the copies of photos and documents with just a very few contemporary objects. It was the result of the first serious historical inquiry of the SS project in Wewelsburg, and it was very focused on the local scenery. At the latest, some 20 years later, it was clear that the huge output of historical research on National Socialism, and especially on the SS in the meantime, as well as the changes of visitors' perception of historical exhibits, demanded a revision of that documentation. Since 2000, the District Museum Wewelsburg itself organized the scientific work for a new exhibition. We could convince the academic advisors of national and federal states moneylenders that, although it's just a rather small museum in the middle of nowhere, Wewelsburg is the right place for the first permanent memorial exhibition that deals with the SS not only as the perpetrators of their commemorated victims, but that also takes a critical look on the ideological self-image that stood behind its murderous deeds. 2000 was also the year when a memorial stone was placed on the remains of the former concentration camp's roll call place. The grounds of the camp changed during the post-war years nearly completely into an almost ordinary-looking settlement of German refugees from Middle East Europe. The inhabitants of Wewelsburg were reluctant to allow a memorial there until the initiative came from a young group of villagers. In April 2010, we opened the new and very enlarged exhibition, Ideology and Terror of the SS. In contrast to the former one, this exhibit is really museum-like. It is focused as far as possible on the presentation and contextualization of original objects from both sides, the material inheritance of the victims and the remains of the affirmative living environment of the SS members. Although one of the principal results of our research is that Wewelsburg was not meant as a site for a written-out religious cult of the SS, but as a secret exclusive place for meetings and for the rest of its generals, and although we emphasize this change of view by all means since more than 10 years, the common perception is still widely trapped by the first interpretation. This, of course, made it even more difficult to present original objects of the SS. We were eager to prevent the slightest appearance of an affirmative, erratic, or admiring presentation. Therefore, it was necessary to develop presentation strategies that considered the objects as well as their interplay with neighboring objects and their position in the room. Thus, the main principles in the presentation of the SS things are, for example, a storage facility arrangement. The showcases are integrated into plain exhibition display units designed to resemble storeroom cabinets with panels in different shades of white. For example, one of the few recorded intentions of Himmler was to have a shrine at the castle for the death heads rings of the SS bearers who died or were killed in action. We are showing a genuine ring together with a post-war fake without any jewelry accentuation. This is on the right side. The showcase on the right side on this picture above. The sober magazine-like presentation of objects is linked, if possible, with their massification, because single objects rather appear as icons than many of the same or the similar. Another principle is to obscure but not to conceal. SS uniforms, for example, are not shown as a whole or on a dressed dummy, but partly obscured by frosted glass. The contemporary painting of Oswald Pohl, head of the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office, clothed in a medieval knight's armor, can only be seen sideways but not frontal. So you must imagine that this picture is behind this table, and you can see it from there and from there, but not from front side. So no one can make a worship selfie with one of the self-declared highest SS knights. The Jew lantern was often given away by Himmler to married SS men in order to replace the Christian Christmas for SS families through the celebration of winter solstice. In the exhibition, it is presented in combination with photos of its production by prisoners in the brickworks of Neuengamme. This is how we try to show how inevitably the remains of SS folklore are linked with the deadly violent character of that organization. As far as possible, we have made interviews with the last former concentration camp inmates of Niederhagen who were alive in the last 2 decades. These interviews can be seen and heard in the exhibit. In contrast, we didn't give voice to former Wewelsburg SS men directly, although I personally interviewed some of the very last of them. We display a lot of examples for the use of the so-called Black Sun ornament by neo-Nazis, Satanists, and mystics, but we put the showcase at the ceiling to make it inconvenient to look upon them, or in contrast, to make it easier to ignore them. The most important object is, of course, the castle itself, and within it, especially the 2 rooms in the North Tower. In the years of the former exhibitions, these rooms could only be entered in guided tours. Now they are open for all visitors. It is obvious that these rooms attract people who are still in favor of Nazism. To prevent any kind of adoring or affirmative behavior, as far as possible, we took different measures. In the crypt, we hung on the walls the reproductions of the 10 paintings which represent the first, though ineffective, memorial for the victims of war and violence in Wewelsburg, situated there in 1950. There is also a media station which explains the legends and the myths around the North Tower. In the Obergruppenführersaal, we distributed a lot of big gray and orange beanbags. This creates an atmosphere that invites one rather to lounge than to stand to attention. How successful we destroyed any alleged erratic impression of that room can be seen by the reactions of neo-Nazi blogs and websites. They are very angry about us because we demolished their favorite place at Wewelsburg Castle. So, I guess by this very few points you can imagine that Wewelsburg is not only a site of historical interest, it is and will remain a place of current commitment to democratic society and the clarifying fight against its enemies. Thank you.